In Georgia, you mentioned that there were Republican poll, I guess, authorities to confirm that the votes were done properly.
Well,
They're
it's
blockading you, the attorneys from.
yes.
I don't understand how Republicans, are these rhinos, are they true Republicans?
Well,
Are they sold out?
I have my, well, I don't know whether they're true Republicans. I have my opinion on whether they're very good citizens, or whether they're doing their duty as statesmen. I won't voice those opinions to you today, but I think you can probably infer what I think about that. You know, when you get any kind of elected or appointed office, you swear an oath of the Constitution of the United States. I swore that oath when I became an attorney, and I take that oath very, very seriously. And if for any reason somebody violates that oath, I don't care what party they're a member of, that person needs to be held accountable for what they've done.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've heard of the option of surety bonds, that when a person takes an oath for an office, they're supposed to be bonded. And there's one lady, can anybody help me? Somebody somewhere in the country, she learned that there is an option to hold them accountable, that they have to come up with the money, that she can sue them for the bonds that they put up when they began the office that they were elected to, if they don't uphold the oath of the office. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so what she's speaking about is the issue of surety bonds that elected, typically legislative people in our government have. Well, what is that? That's basically a bond that's held by a surety company. So like an insurer, in some states they're public, in some states they're held by a private company, insuring them against lawsuits that can be brought against them for actions that they undertake in the lawful fulfillment of their duty.
Isn't it like medical malpractice?
Essentially it's like an insurance against malpractice. What it covers is activities that are undertaken under what's called the color of law. What's color of law? That means when you were apparently doing your illegal duty, even if a court later finds that you weren't doing your legal duty. So I honestly don't think it's a very good approach for a lot of these COVID mandate issues, because when a city councilman or a school board member is enforcing a COVID-19 mandate, they're always just going to point to those state directives. They're going to say, that directive told me to do it. And when they can point at that, there's a very plausible argument they're acting under color of law. We can challenge that in courts, and I think that the challenge may hold up in courts. I don't think it would hold up as basically an administrative insurance challenge. So that's an option. It may be a better option in conservative states where the legislature is already receptive to autonomy, bodily autonomy. I don't think it's a great option in California. So we've explored it, but I don't recommend it. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about like poll workers and poll watchers needing to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
That's of course outrageous to
Yes.
me. It seems like that's something that should be getting hit really hard right now. So like the next election, there's going to be no unvaccinated poll watchers?
Not if we have our way. As I mentioned, we already have a plaintiff on that one. We're bringing suit over that.
Oh, good.
That's going to be occurring hopefully in the next few weeks. A lot of that's contingent on our ability to fund it. But we have some funding in place for that. We're going to be bringing that challenge. We have plaintiffs in Los Angeles County. If that is being required in any other counties, I would need plaintiffs in those counties as well, but it'd be a similar loss. Go ahead.
Can you describe some of the anomalies you witnessed as a poll watcher?
Yeah, I thought I might get that question, so I actually brought my report with me because I don't tend to remember details like that. Okay, one of the first ones. So, pursuant to Election Code 19362, I attempted to visually inspect voting booths while no voters were present. Shortly thereafter, I was approached by a poll worker who was not wearing a name tag in violation of Election Code 12303C3. In violation of Election Code 19362, the poll worker told me that I was not to approach voting booths, nor to inspect anything having to do with voting booths, unless this could be done from a distance of approximately 30 feet. That's nowhere in the election code. He made that up. The poll worker then told me that if I were to continue inspecting voting booths, that she would call the police.
It's a Democrat.
During the collection of ballots, I again began to approach within approximately 15 feet of voter booths in order to observe the collection procedures, and I was told by a different poll worker, this time he was wearing a name tag that said Randy on it, that I was not permitted to inspect the voting booths, which is, as you had, a direct contradiction of that election code. So there's 4 violations right there. Another one, in violation of Election Code 14202, no voter list was posted anywhere in the building. We asked to see it, and it was not shown to us. But I said that when I requested to see the voter list, I was told by a poll worker, this time with a name tag saying Arnold, that there was no voter list and that I would not be permitted to see one. I repeated this request to a different poll worker. He reiterated what Arnold had said, adding that per the vote center procedures, the voter list is now quote unquote gone. When I indicated that Election Code 14202B requires that election officials provide the voter list they're using even when we have vote centers, I was again refused access by both of those poll workers. Another violation, on 2 separate occasions I witnessed election officials who were helping other people to fill out their ballots without first obtaining declarations under oath that they could do so. I also witnessed voting devices that were not sealed immediately after the removal of ballots that were contained in them. But in some cases were sealed in bulk, so all of them together. After all the ballots were put into these containers, they then went back to the containers and then sealed all of them afterward. And another thing that I saw actually was when they were putting seals onto the containers, this was at a high school, so they had some high school kids helping out, and one of the high school kids got the numbering wrong on the seals he was putting on. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he skipped 5 and 6 and went straight to 7. So an adult had him cut all those seals off of them and replace them with new seals. Now obviously that's not intentional fraud from anybody, but that is an irregularity. And if poll workers are not trained to avoid that sort of thing, well, you can absolutely guarantee that somebody in a different precinct is getting away with using that to commit fraud. Because why wouldn't they? And if the other poll workers don't know to look for it, don't know to say that he's doing something wrong, well, they'll just let it go. Spaces at the official table were occasionally left vacant, during which time persons other than election officials could have, in violation of Election Code 14221, interfered with the tables used to track the voters. However, I didn't actually observe any instances of this occurring. But again, that shows an irregularity that could be exploited in other precincts. So what was going on there, they'll have a table like that, and the people who sign you in are supposed to sit there the whole time. There were periods of time when nobody was sitting there. So I could walk up, I'm somebody who wants to commit fraud, I could walk up, I could sign out all the Republicans, if I know who the Republicans are, sign all of them out and say they've already voted. Now all of them have to vote provisionally and their ballot probably isn't going to be counted. So those were the kinds of things that I saw. I'm sure that lots of others go on. Like I said, we're going to do a seminar on this when we get closer to the election. Yes, Becky.
Yeah. So Alex, we hear a lot about vote by mail and how it is easy to have fraud in that case.
Yes.
What does poll watching look like when those ballots are being processed? Will Election Integrity Project be able to assign people to observe that process when all those mail-in ballots are opened and whatever they do with them?
Yeah, well, vote by mail is actually the one exception to the rule that I stated earlier about being legally permitted to watch every stage of the electoral process. Because in my legal opinion, if you're voting by mail, putting that vote in the mailbox, the mailman coming by and picking it up, taking it to the post office distributing that's part of the voting process. And obviously you can't observe that. They're not going to let you into the post office to watch everything postal workers are doing. However, you are permitted to watch those votes once they arrive at the county registrar's office and are counted. So actually watching the vote count, I think, is at least as, if not more important than watching the vote actually occur in those vote centers. That's something that Linda Payne with Election Integrity Project is going to be coordinating, and we'll give you more information on that if you sign up for our newsletter. Yes?
I served as a poll watcher in not last year, year before last, November 2020. And worked that morning, the morning of election day here in Fullerton, at some historical building on the hill, if anybody knows where that is. But I was here that morning in Fullerton, and things seemed to be running very smoothly. They were very cooperative. In contrast, in the afternoon, I served as a poll watcher in Point Park.
Yeah.
Totally opposite. It was in a gym. They wouldn't let me get close. They had me sit so far away. There was no way I could really see what you saw.
Right.
And I submitted my report after election day then. I'm curious, do you know, are you working with Linda Payne at all to take into consideration the reports that we poll watchers submitted in 2020, so that those challenges, when I was told sit down in that chair in Warner Park, you know, how do we respond to those kind of instructions?
Yeah,
I don't have
that's-
the legal knowledge and you have.
That's what our hotline's gonna be for. If you have any question relating to the election on election day, and you wanna know what's the answer to my question, we're gonna be there so we can answer it. It's not legal advice, and it's not an attorney-client relationship, but it's better than nothing, because I know election law, I can tell you what your rights are, tell you what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. If they really had you that far away from no, I believe you, because I've seen it. But if they did have you that far away, that would not be permitted. And I would tell you, it depends. A lot of this stuff, you've got to be aggressive. But sort of my strategy is, if you can force them to be aggressive, rather than you being the aggressive one, you tend to get away with a lot more. So I'll typically just, they can tell you, sit this far away, and then you can say, get closer again and say, I understood you to be saying 15 feet away, since that's the legal requirement. I'm sorry, I didn't know that this seems like it's 15 feet away. You don't have to get in their face and be confrontational, but I would say stick to your guns on this stuff. Yeah.
Is it true that if you're a board member for CRA that you're not able to do poll watching?
I don't know anything about that.
Why? President, do you know that answer?
Because it's nonpartisan. And so we serve as on a partisan board.
That sounds incorrect to me. I'm not familiar with any section of California's election code that says that. I don't have the whole thing memorized, so I'm not going to say it's not in there. But that sounds incorrect to me.
Election integrity, California states that those of us who are on the board of the CRA are ineligible to be poll watchers because of our positions.
Okay.
Now, if we go as an individual, not as a member, then we are eligible to participate.
Okay, I understand. So I understand the question. So when you sign up as a poll watcher, part of the form that you fill out is going to ask what organization you're poll watching on behalf of. You actually don't need to be on behalf of any organization according to California election law, but I think it is a lot better to do it on behalf of an organization. If that organization is one on which you are a board member, no, you cannot write that you're poll watching on behalf of that organization. That's true. If that was the question, then that's correct. The instruction you were given was correct. Yes, go ahead.
Is having a voting period rather than a voting day unconstitutional? It seems like I was doing some amateur research. I don't know if it was the Bill of Rights or something. And I'm not it's like, it was pretty easy for me to see this really clear-cut thing where one of our founding fathers, I don't know if it's Federalist Papers, said, it's election day, walks in a room, everybody sees this. So my question is twofold. Is what we have today, the mess we have, is it unconstitutional? And how do these rats pull this off? Like, how does this stuff, if something that's so clearly, unless I'm mistaken, unconstitutional, like, how does that get passed? How can we?
Yeah, so the question was, two questions. First is, how do we let unconstitutional things, very clearly unconstitutional things, slide? The second question is, are they required to vote on a single day and not over a period of 18 days, which is what we're going to do in California? First question, the answer is very simple. It happens because we let it happen. And I don't mean, it's really easy to point at the politicians that are doing wrong. It's really easy to point at the judges that make bad rulings. It's really easy to point at all those people. But fundamentally, I think the finger needs to be pointed at we the people. Here's an example. You know how if you buy a chainsaw, it's got a little warning on it that says, "Do not attempt to stop blade with hands."
Yeah.
And you say, that is so stupid. Why does it say that? Well, it says that because there's an army of lawyers that works for that company that is aware of an area in negligence law that's called failure to warn defect. And they figure, there's another army of lawyers against us who represent people who are harmed by products, and they are going to sue us if anybody cuts their hands off with this chainsaw. Well, that happens if there's an army of thousands of lawyers on both sides. People do things to really protect themselves against not just reasonable things, but even, really fringe things that might not happen. Well, that doesn't happen when there's maybe a dozen conservative constitutional lawyers in the country. People aren't really afraid to see a lawsuit from conservatives if there aren't enough people bringing them. So that's sort of what Lex Rex is trying to do. Currently, people with a lot of money get representation, large organizations get representation, the average person does not. And we would like to see that change, because once that changes, I think you'll start seeing a different result here. People will care about the Constitution, and it'll be upheld. To answer your other question about whether or not voting has to be it has to be on one day rather than over a span of time, the Constitution actually does specify the day that we're to hold elections. But it's not clear on what the phrase election means. It's my opinion that we are required to hold elections on a single day, not so much for constitutional reasons, as I think that it's pretty necessary to comply with federal law. And a lot of those oversights have just kind of been turned a blind eye, for lack of a better expression. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how to put this without sounding like I'm crazy, okay? You indicated you supported the Trump team in his
Yes.
defense.
Yeah.
My thinking has been since the election that the Trump team or whoever knew election fraud was going to take place.
Oh yeah.
Was fully aware for his whole term, I'm assuming, but at least for the year, that there was going to be fraud.
Yeah, well, Trump said that prior to the election. He publicly said there's going to be voter fraud.
The Dominion machines
Well,
controversy.
and a lot of that is, so I think that the focus was unfairly put on voter fraud in the election. I think the broader term election irregularities is more appropriate. And the biggest kind of irregularity we saw was states violating their own election laws. Their laws had to do it one way, they didn't do it that way. And in most cases, they used the pandemic as their excuse.
But basically, I have not been able to comprehend how these brilliant minds behind the Trump organization and team and whatever you want to call it, allowed that to happen. We know 80 million Americans voted for Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty.
Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you how that happened.
How does it?
Yeah, no,
Unless I'm missing a piece that something's going to happen.
I'll tell you exactly what
later on,
happened. I'll tell you
because-
exactly. Yeah, it's so prior to the election, we brought suit over all these election irregularities that had occurred. And time's up. I don't know. I'll finish the answer, then I'll be. But we brought suit on the irregularities in state election law that we knew had occurred, and we were told almost unanimously by judges throughout the country that those suits were not yet ripe because the election hadn't occurred yet. So in Anglo-American jurisprudence, you can only bring suit when somebody has standing and the case is ripe. What that means is that there has to have been harm that occurred to the plaintiff for the plaintiff to be able to sue. Trump is the plaintiff in this case. And judges universally told us he has not been harmed until the election takes place and he appears to lose it. Well, then after the election, we brought a whole slew of lawsuits. I think we had, I want to say 93 lawsuits throughout the country going on. And I have the stats on this. We can get them for you at some point. I think we put them on our website, right, Kristen? Yeah, we can put them on our website. But we have the stats on this. But A huge number of those lawsuits were dismissed at that point because they claimed that they were now moot. So, again, if you want to have a live lawsuit in court, it has to be one where the issue is actually one that can be remedied by a court. The court has to be able to do something that will fix the harm that occurred to you, whether that's give you money or issue an injunction or whatever. They told us, well, the election already took place, it's moot now, we can't do anything about it. So we were told on the front end, the case is not right. We were told on the back end, the case is moot. Now, other cases were dismissed, just thrown out before the complaint even went in front of a judge who could hear any of the evidence. They were dismissed for lack of standing. Some of them, the judges did hear the evidence, and they said, actually, right now there's an attorney in, I believe, Michigan, where they're currently saying he engaged in legal malpractice because he submitted a sworn affidavit from from a poll watcher attesting to all this fraud. And they said, you didn't personally verify the contents of that sworn affidavit. That never happens. I mean, my sister Vanessa's over there, she's a lawyer. Have you ever heard of a lawyer personally verifying the contents of a sworn affidavit?
No.
That's the purpose of submitting under penalty of perjury. That's why you do that. But that lawyer is currently being prosecuted for misconduct. So there's, what does it come down to? No judge in the country wanted to be the judge who overturns our election. As soon as the media announced that Joe Biden was president, they knew they were fighting an uphill battle, and that if they were to announce that our election was illegitimately conducted, they would bring down hell's fury upon them. They would bring mobs to their house. They'd get death threats from themselves against themselves and their children. So no judge in the country, despite that being their sworn duty, despite swearing an oath to the Constitution, was willing to overturn it. And that's why we ended up seeing what we did. So that's why we got to get mobilized. That's why we got to act, because then the political will is there.